Welcome back to another episode of the Wheels and Beyond podcast. Today we have Colin Evans, and you are a...
So I currently work as an emergency physician in London. I'm also a trauma team leader. And prior to all this, I served as paramedic for Middlesex London Paramedic Service for 12 years. And so I've been around London and Middlesex for most of my life. And I've had the opportunity to view the way that society functions from numerous different perspectives.
I like that because I want different perspectives. And so I've been meaning to chat with you for over a year now, and our schedules and everything just haven't matched up. I want to talk today about specifically, and a few other things, don't worry, we'll never stay on track on this, but specifically how you recommend a family go car light, which is what you have done. And I have actually interviewed your wife last year as well.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
And so how many kids do you have? And you can go watch that episode, but let's do a quick primer.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that as much as my professional titles are helpful, my number one job is that my wife Holly and I have 4 kids, and we try to live where we are here in London and explore London primarily by bicycle, which is something that we evolved over the past 5 years. That's happened because of very deliberate decisions regarding how we want to live our life, and it was evolutionary in nature.
So when you decided to go car light, and just for context here, car light, I would call it's not always having to rely on a vehicle, or especially when it comes to a couple and parents, not 2 vehicles or more, because sometimes there are more in the driveway than needed. But you're down to 1 van.
Yeah.
And what is your bicycle of choice?
So we've got an Urban Arrow cargo bicycle that Holly and I wrestle over who gets to have it each day. But the general rule is that if you've got the kids, you get the bike. And then I have a Farhad T100 that I use for my daily commuting 365 days a year.
Awesome. Oh, and okay, this is something I definitely don't know. We chatted a little bit before this, but we did not cover this. Your commute to work. So you work at which hospital or hospitals?
So I work at 3 hospitals here in the city, and one about 100 kilometers from here. But the 3 I work at here in the city, my commute to Victoria Hospital is about 8.5 kilometers, depending on the route I choose, and my commute to Western is about 1.5 kilometers.
Okay, and you live in Old North, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Western, that is so doable.
Yeah.
It's very, how many kilometers is that, sorry?
1.5 kilometers.
Okay. So
mostly downhill on the way there, which is a bummer on the way home from the 4 a.m. shifts.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you find it really dark? Obviously it's dark, but do you take the TVP back, or no? It's
TVP, coming back from Victoria Hospital, I tend not to do the TVP in the middle of the night. Sometimes I do. It's still a nice ride. I've got a good headlamp, and it doesn't really cause me any grief, but I do find it's more direct to go through downtown, and I get home a little faster that way.
Got it. Okay. And so, yes, now talking about, so there was UH and
Victoria and St. Joe's.
So St. Joe's, very also doable, yes?
It's doable, but I can walk it, and the lockup infrastructure is a little suspect. And so, for instance, one of our residents in the Emerge program, on her very first shift, July 1st, her very first year of residency, had her bike stolen from out in front of St. Joe's. And so when I do ride at St. Joe's, I actually, and this happens actually at all 3 hospitals, I'll wheel it right inside the hospital and put it in our locker room, which is okay, right, for safety, but it would not be something that we could have more than, we can't do it at scale. We can't have more than one of us do that because, we don't actually get very large locker rooms.
And I know the answer, but I want to ask you, why don't you use the bike cage? In this case, Victoria.
So Victoria has an outdoor exposed bike cage, which is nobody uses, partly because they put in new racks that don't fit bicycles. They're little wheel bender racks, and they don't
are
fit
they
the bikes.
On the ground, just a few inches up?
Well, no, they're up, but they're the narrow rails that are too short for anything larger than a 26-inch wheel, and they're hollow steel. So those cages routinely get broken into, and bikes get stolen from them. Now I use the one in the lockup of the B tower indoor parking garage, because the cage goes right to the ceiling, so people can't come over the top. It's right around the corner from the security office, so it's a little bit better, but I still find myself often bringing the bike inside.
Yeah, so that cage there that you're talking about is what I was thinking about, because I've talked to 2 other people, and I think they've had their bikes stolen from there as well, and it's like, oof, it's right around the security. It would be great if it was in view of security and like.
Yeah, in fact, there's a large space that is in view of security. The big problem is that hospitals haven't adopted a mindset yet of what the value of having their staff commute by non-car could bring, right? So we haven't optimized our transit service to the hospitals. We haven't worked with the city to optimize infrastructure for cycles to get to the hospitals, or walking, or whatever route you want to try and get there. And so, safety is a concern with getting to the facilities. Even Western is sort of that way. The other issue is that when you get there, it's not very friendly to bring your bike there, to store your bike there, to transition to your workwear, whatever that is. So when you look at other settings, if you were in Vancouver, they have an indoor facility sort of in the building where you come and you lock up your bike, you go to your showers, you have storage for your outerwear. Everything is there for you, and it's prepared.
And have you been there?
A friend of mine just finished her fellowship there, so she was sending me pictures. When I was at Sick Kids in Toronto for a month, I would walk past the door for people to take their bikes inside for the bike lockup indoors. We've talked to the hospitals about this somewhat through my organization, the Western Community for Active Transportation, which is a bit of a knockoff from Watts, with the intention of trying to improve people's commutes to the hospital. And I think right now, St. Joe's is a little bit more motivated to look at investing in infrastructure, whether that's something similar to what Western put in with their glass enclosure.
Oh, it looks
right?
nice too. I'll ask you in a second about that, but go on.
Or whether they do it indoors, but they seem a little bit more motivated. Right now, LHSC has some other priorities.
I wonder what those are. But okay, with that bike cage at Western though, like, do you use that or?
So again, I don't use it. It's on the far side of the campus for me, and I'm not on campus enough. I'm on campus about once a week, and so I haven't really looked into accessing that, because again, if I really need to, I can bring my bike into my office. I'm fortunate enough to have an office space there, but I haven't had a bike stolen from Western since I was in my first year of my undergrad 13 years ago, and I brought a cable lock with my mountain bike. And in the summertime, a cable lock was very...
Scissors can often be used. Okay, that's maybe an exaggeration, but yes.
Yeah.
Anyone listening, please don't use cable locks pretty much ever. I mean, they're just a keep... What's the term? It keeps honest people honest.
Yeah.
And if someone wants your bike and you have a cable lock, it's gone.
Yeah.
Yep. However, I think you've probably learned your lesson. And now, okay, with the Urban Arrow that you have, which is the cargo bike with the front big basket that you put all of your children in, is it still all, or 3 or 4?
So we can do 4. We can do all 4, but our oldest is nearing 10 years old. Our youngest twins are 4, and so it's getting tighter. So if we want to transport all 4 of them, then what I do is I put a seat on the back. So I can put a seat on the back rack, still come in under the weight rating, and transport all 4 of them for longer distances. But our 10-year-old is able to ride her bike most places in the city independently now, and so can our 5-year-old. So when we rode here yesterday, both of them rode independently. But I find that herding the cats on the road means that 2 of us should be on bikes if we're doing that. So today, when we made the choice of coming here, and I'm going to be leaving a little ahead of my wife, we decided that our youngest, like our 5-year-old, shouldn't be on her own bike, just because it's challenging to navigate that.
I have heard that from other parents as well.
Yeah.
In that you say, hey, we're going to be turning left at this intersection. And I think people who have listened to the other podcasts might know exactly of this instance. But turn left. And so the son went on to the left side of the road rather than into the left part of the right lane.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, and then you can't really wrangle, because at that point they're off in the desert of the road.
Yeah.
And you're like, now what?
Yeah, we have to be really deliberate with forming a bit of a peloton, where typically what I find is that the arrow goes ahead towards the center lane, that we pin the younger one in between the arrow and the curb. We either have the older one ahead or behind, and then the other adult travels behind and sort of forms the beginning of that wedge. And that's partly to control child behavior, but it's more to control driver behavior, right? And so I find that the arrow is formidable enough. It tends to force drivers out. We still get some angry passes almost every time. We had one yesterday with a Land Rover that overtook us to get to a red light in a very aggressive fashion. And it's hard. Like, how do you have a logical conversation with people about something they're doing autonomously, right? I think most drivers, when they see cyclists on the road, they see, the equivalent of a box, right? That they have to navigate around. This thing is traveling slower than me, and therefore I need to overtake it, without any real consideration for the rest of their journey. And the fact
Yeah.
that they're going to arrive at the destination, that red light, at the same time as the beings that they're putting in mortal danger to do so. And it's so autonomous, that choice, that they're not really reflecting on the hazard of what they're doing.
I think you nailed it right there because, yeah, they get to the red light faster. They've passed you successfully. Yes, that's their mission in driving. They're going to get there faster. But they're not. Like, I say this so many times that people are going to get annoyed, but, like, it's always about average speed over top speed, especially in cities. Okay, if you're going from one city to another, sure, if you're going slightly faster, you'll get there faster. But you also use more fuel, so technically you're going to be wasting time filling up faster. Anyways, there's that whole thing. But in cities, like 30, 40 kilometers an hour should be the standard. And when passing, you don't need to pass everyone on the street like a cyclist. Anyways, or you can wait and calmly pass. However, I am starting to think that some of those aggressive passes, when the engine revs, etc., and they go, I genuinely have started to think that people just don't understand, one, how loud revving is and how aggressive it sounds, and two, how frightening it is, because no one is. We already know this. A lot of people don't go on a bike after they are like of age to drive, which is unfortunate, and so they just genuinely do not understand what they're doing and how frightening it is.
Well, this brings us a bit to the transition that Holly and I have made, because today on our ride here, there's a vehicle traveling behind us, and we arrived at Cheapside and Richmond, and this vehicle that had been traveling behind us and I felt slightly threatened by, then honked, and I turn around and it's a full-size Bronco, and I was like angry. And then I realized it was a friendly honk, and this is my cousin waving at us from behind the steering wheel, and she's so excited that she saw us on our bikes. And Holly and I were talking about it afterwards, because we used to have an F-250 and a GMC Sierra, and we were like, thank God we don't drive those vehicles anymore, because the threat that you perceive with a large looming vehicle in your periphery, like it's there, is immense, right?
It's the aura, it's the presence of the vehicle, which is totally what they're designed to do too. Yeah. Like, they're supposed to be menacing and command the street.
That's how they're marketed.
Exactly. It's literally, so they have I'm going to call it soccer moms, but they buy the Sierras. Yeah. And it's like, dang. I actually, just the other day, they now have the vertical lights now, that are like the strip vertical lights, and it makes it look so tall, because it is too.
Yeah, it is. It's a freight train now.
Yeah, it's terrifying, because you can't see in front. We already know all of that. You can't see where you're driving. But that case about the honk, we've had our friends do that too. Yeah, and they don't mean to do it. It's just like they honk, and we're like turning around, or like we turn around and are also angry. We're about to like chew them out. And we're like, oh, hi.
Yeah. It's one of those things I've been trying to adopt a sense of curiosity about the world, because I heard recently you can't be curious and angry at the same time. You can't be curious and judgmental at the same time. I still have a threat response. Like, I still have that sort of surge of danger, which to me manifests as anger, right? And so trying to curtail that a little bit and treat other humans as humans is one of my goals. But I mean, I've also had numerous interactions with drivers, and the girls witnessed me throw a bike lock at someone who hit the chariot one day. It's one of those things that we're all trying our best, I think, and we're trying to create a space that hasn't traditionally been there. And so just as much for us, we're trying to come up, like you said, we're trying to figure out how to go car light. The cars around us are trying to figure out how to navigate this new space in which there are people going car light. Yeah. Right. And so trying to be on a bit of a mission to civilize is really the goal.
After all of that, and maybe people listening are like, wait a second, there's like, this happened. Why don't you just drive a car? And it's like, okay, at the top I said we're going to be talking about the car light side of things. So now that's all the context. Now, why and how did you guys go light, and what was that process? Again, kind of covered in the previous one, but from your perspective.
So, I mean, the big transition for us was when we moved from our farm outside the city into the city. And that was we bought our house in March of 2020, which was a bizarre time to buy a house. And we chose a neighborhood that was walkable and good access to a school that we wanted our kids to go to. That was where it started. We made the decision to come into the city as opposed to move to another farm, which was sort of our choice at the time, because we both appreciated the role that commuting was already playing in our lives when I was coming into the hospitals from outside the city. And as my time was going to have more stress put on it as I started residency, we realized that there was many circumstances in which I just wouldn't come home because it was going to require getting in a car and leaving and potentially getting in a car and coming back. So that was part of it. At the same time, Arnold Schwarzenegger's sort of mission to change the way people were living, particularly through both a climate lens and a fitness lens. He was talking about how he basically uses a bicycle everywhere he goes, which was quite amazing considering he's known for driving a Hummer.
I was going to say, he drives tanks everywhere, but yes.
But he actually, and if you look at his Instagram feed, it's always him riding bicycles. So for me, it was like almost permission to consider an alternate means of transportation.
Oh, that's a good word.
And so then we started off by getting our daughter a frog and trying to teach her how to ride through the COVID, months on our farm, right? And then for Mother's Day, I got Holly a bike as well, like a nice sort of vintage-looking Dutch bike sort of design. And then I won an award and decided to direct my award money towards buying a bike for me. And that's when I bought the Farhead, with the intention being that when I started my residency here at the hospitals, I wasn't going to buy a parking pass. That was the first step. Don't buy a parking pass. So a bit of a forcing mechanism.
It makes it so easy, right? It's like, well, I'm already paying, what is it, like $90 at this point a month? Or something? Yeah, I think it was 80 in the last few years. But so $90 a month. It's like, okay, it's not about the money at this point. It's more of a, you just don't want to do that.
So then there was that sort of, it was partly about the money, but it was also a forcing mechanism for me to be more physically active and do something that I thought was going to be better for my mental health. This after driving definitely more than 1 million kilometers in the city in my time as a paramedic.
Sorry, how many miles? I just want to confirm.
I think it was probably 1 million. Like if you think 12 years working 2,000 hours plus a year, spending most of that time driving, particularly in that time when we were moving a lot of vehicles around on standby all night long, just driving around in circles in the city. We'd put on hundreds to 1,000 kilometers a shift sometimes, just doing loops of the city.
Wow. I did not realize that was that much.
And so whether or not my math is right, hundreds of thousands of kilometers in the city anyways. And so I realized there was a benefit to not being in a car. And I wanted to try it. And so it was really a try. The first year was a learning experience. The winter was a little bit forgiving, which was nice because I did get studded tires.
I was going to ask, how fast did those go on?
Typically around the time that you see the first frost, because once there's frost on the ground, there's frosty leaves on the ground, and you're gonna lay it down. It's a little bit earlier, and it's so like begrudging that I do it because it's just like you're just like dropping the anchor on your rides for the rest of the year. It is. Anyways, that was our first year. In the second year, we had our twins. Torrin and Sloan came in July of 2021. And we made the decision to really commit by selling our second vehicle. At that time, we had a F-250, and I'd already traded my pickup truck for a crossover. And so we chose to sell the crossover and go down to one vehicle.
And the 250, I have to ask, was that because you were on a farm at one point?
So the F-250 was there because Holly hauled like 10 horse trailers.
There we go.
So she had horse trailers with a gooseneck. And we were still, up until the twins were born, really quite sure she was going back to that lifestyle of traveling long distances with many horses, frequently. And so we were driving this vehicle that did not fit our life in the city, right? We had a single lane driveway in Old North with, and so it took up a lot of space. It was very present in the neighborhood. It was very loud. First, we made the decision to get rid of the second vehicle. Then we made the decision to transition from an F-250 to something much smaller, a Yukon XL. But that was, again, the intention behind that being that we thought there was still a potential need for us to haul trailers, and it was the only thing with the towing capacity that could handle 4 kids. Because when you go from 2 to 4 kids, everything changes. Everything changes. And so that was our transition, right? We were going to one vehicle, Yukon XL, that's what we're going to do. And so I continued commuting. We continued to build a cycling lifestyle with our daughters, and Holly and I would go on dates riding our 2, analog bicycles when we had dates, which we didn't really do through 2021 with the twins at home. And then once we got to 2022, we were reflecting again, and we went, we're probably not going to be hauling a horse trailer anytime soon. We don't really need to be driving this bus-like vehicle. We were getting more insight into what that meant to drive this massive vehicle in the city, how that impacts the people around us, how that impacts our experience of the world. And Holly was the one who proposed that we transition to a van. With that, with the savings, because the Yukon was a very expensive vehicle and it was very sought after at the time, to buy the van, which was actually quite expensive because it was 2022 and everything used was expensive.
Yeah, you sold at a high price, you bought at a high price, unfortunately. Yeah.
But the difference was enough for us to buy the Arrow, right? And that was, we had to make a choice between, do we want to go hybrid because we're concerned about climate, or do we want to buy a standard gas van that we're going to drive less? Right? And we bought the gas van and definitely drive it a lot less. We don't drive it in the city really at all.
That's actually the same with us. I was going to do a video at some point. Maybe I still will. But it was even more relevant back then when the hybrids weren't as good. But we have a smaller, we do not have 4 kids, so there's that. But we have a smaller hatchback. And it is more environmentally friendly to have that than an EV or a hybrid. And I have to run the math on that still, but I'm fairly convinced that is the case because it barely leaves the driveway.
And so I think that this is a good spot to talk about sort of the cost of vehicle ownership, because when we transitioned from the Yukon to the van, we moved from a sort of a more luxury style vehicle with luxury style insurance and significant fuel consumption and significant repair costs, right? To put brakes on that thing was immense, was exorbitantly expensive. We moved to a Honda Odyssey where parts are ubiquitous, they're relatively cheap, it's much lighter, and it's way cheaper to insure. So we, just with that transition alone, save $5,000 a year.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's significant.
Right?
I didn't actually expect that much.
Then by dropping our second vehicle, we saved somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000 a year. So we made consistent decisions along the way that have saved us an enormous amount of money. That's the conservative estimate. Like if you look at what CAA says, they're saying basically cost of vehicle ownership in Canada is about $15,000 a year.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
Is it up that?
Yeah.
Last I checked, it was like about 11, 12, I believe. Yeah. When they say 15, I'm not surprised.
When you consider that cost, it made a lot of economic sense. Because that's the first thing people ask us about when they see the Arrow, which costs about $10,000. How can you afford this? Really, it paid for itself in the first year.
I was gonna say, $10,000 for a vehicle. If you now don't need, do you insure it or no?
The Arrow? We've got a rider on our home insurance for it.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
so even with that, it's part of your home insurance, and also it's very low theft from what I've seen. Even with my cargo bike, even though it's more expensive than most other bikes, I don't actually worry as much because it's such a weird bike that
People don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, they're like, what? And even if they could take your Urban Arrow, you'd have to have 5 people to lift it into a bed of a pickup truck, and you could theoretically steal it, but then what? It's yours. There's not that many around.
It's not a very marketable theft.
Yeah,
and so those are some of the things that we found. Anyways, the cost savings was significant, and then the way it changed our world, is something that's difficult to describe. All of a sudden, we've gone from private space in our home to private space in our vehicle to private space at our destination, to one in which the girls are engaged in their community and the environment from the moment we leave the house. They're able to, you watch the wonder, Torin and Sloan were a year old at the time, right? Leighton was 3, Blakely was 8. And watching them engage with the world around them, whether it's talking to our neighbors, waving to strangers on the street or on the path, and then watching nature, actually getting sort of a naturalist exposure to the world every single day. They're watching the leaves on the trees change. They're watching the birds leave and come back. Leighton used to, we'd ride through Harris Park and she'd say, "Go south, geese," right? They know so much more about the world around them as a result of being immersed in it all the time. Yeah. And then the quality of life has improved for us because we make decisions around the value of how we're choosing to spend our time. And so often we count having to get in the van as a significant opportunity cost. If we have to get in the van, that is a -1 to -2 on the value of the experience that we're going to do. Because now you're committing to this time where there's higher stress, less engagement with the world around you. You almost have to sort of subtract that time from your day because it's lost time. You're sitting there, in essentially boredom, waiting to get to the next place.
Yeah, which is where you have that Land Rover flowing it past you. They're annoyed. They want to get to the destination. They don't care about the journey.
Yeah.
And you're in the way. So they'll do anything to get around you.
So I think, when we talk about the opportunity cost of being in a vehicle, and it only came about, this observation came about because we appreciate how much more engagement with the world and their lives our girls get. And we get, right? When people ask me, why I choose to work in London and not one of the surrounding communities, which can sometimes be, advantageous as a physician, I tell them very simply, it's because I can't ride my bike there, right? And that it makes life so simple, right? It choosing to live where you are as best as you can and engaging truly and genuinely with the world around you and your community has enormous knock-on effects to well-being. And it means that our family is truly integrated into our community. We have really deep and rich relationships with our neighbors. Our closest relationships are all on our street now. And that isn't the case when you in a space where everyone is sort of locked in their personal iron boxes.
Yeah.
Right? And on top of that, when we travel throughout the city, the girls get a truer perspective of what's going on in the city. Holly has notoriously always taken everybody down to the library downtown. And as a result, she's developed a really rich relationship with our underhoused population. And our girls have developed a rich relationship with our underhoused population. And they're seeing the effects of how decisions we make as a society impact other individuals. And they're getting more compassion and empathy for a broader population of people. And at the same time, we've got our own community, right? I can't really go anywhere on a bike without someone waving at me or chatting with me at an intersection, whether I know them or not, when they're on their bike, or getting stopped in the street by your dad the other day, right?
Yep.
Like, people pop by and have a chat all the time, and that is such a rewarding and enriching experience. It's really hard to quantify what the impact has been on our lives. So when we talk about going car light, we could talk about the finances of it and the environmental impact, but I would say the big one, the number one takeaway is the fact that your quality of life and the way you engage with the world around you will change in sort of unquantifiable ways.
And that's why everyone's trying to figure out what that is. Like when you say it's unquantifiable, I agree. It's very difficult to explain. Like even coming here I forgot to mention, we're at Gibbons Park today on this nice park bench yet again. And there were two people in two different neighborhoods leaving on their bikes. One had their daughter on the front rack.
Yeah.
it was fun. I'm like, oh, and I waved and they waved back and there were smiles exchanged.
Yes.
And that's super small. It's almost insignificant, but it is not possible in a car. And there's other times when our friends, even with the honking, even if it's a light, hey, hi, they recognize us so much so that they want to be like, hey, hi.
Yeah.
And so it's that. It's
my friends.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they would not have seen us in our car.
No.
It's not how cars work.
Yeah.
You cannot really see through them. Maybe if you don't have tint.
Yes.
But we don't, so that hasn't happened yet still because reflections and everything.
Yeah.
But anyways.
But you're right. That experience is something that people try to capture, regardless of how they travel. And Jeeps are the good example of it. If you look at Jeeps and you see the sticker of the two fingers on the steering wheel on their back window, or the ducks on their dashboard, they're trying to form a community. But that community can't be as strong as the one you have when you're talking at a stop sign about your day, right? Or when you pass each other and have this knowing sort of look about, this bike world is as good as it gets.
Yeah.
Right? It's you can't buy your way into it. You have to just show up. And as soon as you show up, you are welcome.
Yeah, and as much as we're talking about a cargo bike that is not inexpensive and my cargo bike and this and that don't need those. It is literally just two wheels and any bike. I still have things against the Canadian Tire bikes only because your experience won't be as good. But maybe I should stop bringing those up all the time. But anyways, it is nice to have a bike that the wheels don't fall off. There's that.
Yeah.
But even if that's what you have, then yes, you can show up and stop at an intersection and have that chat and then move on with your day. It's Very nice. I'm gonna look at my list real quick. This is good. I'm liking it
Good.
because we've kind of we're approaching this topic from all different aspects, which is still like, how do you recommend a family go car light? And you've gone from very car heavy, literally and figuratively, like both. Those are very heavy, massive tanks of vehicles to now a van and an urban Arrow.
Well, and I think when we talk about car heavy, I mean, I drove nothing but a truck from the time I was 16 years old. And actually, I learned in a truck when I was 12, out fencing in a 1977 GMC short box until I was 37. So 21 years, I drove nothing but a pickup truck. And I had no conception of driving anything but a pickup truck. And now I navigate our neighborhood and realize how preposterous it is. And we load up our van in so many different configurations. I realize how much utility it offers, right? Whether we're putting hay bales on the roof or we're loading 5 bikes in the back with no seats. I can put the Arrow in the back, right?
Oh, really?
I can load the Arrow into the back of the bike and take it to the shop when I have a wheel problem or a repair that means I can't ride it. Yeah, it does.
Wow. So like you don't have to take off the back wheel or anything?
No,
like,
I leave the Arrow intact.
And I can turn the front wheel?
I load it in rear wheel first with half the seats out. Like the back seats fold down, I take out half the front and it wheels right in.
Wow. Okay. I didn't expect that.
And
That's
interestingly,
cool.
like when I got hit by a garbage truck last year, I called Holly and she picked it up. She had the kids in the back and there isn't that initial stress. Like, how are we going to do all this? I was able to leave our 2 girls in the middle bench seat in their car seats and load the Arrow in beside them in order to take it over to the cafe to get rebuilt. It's amazing to have a van for that purpose.
And I have to ask, compared to the Sierra, which is a very large vehicle, but compared to the van, like you wouldn't have been able to do that, right?
So the Yukon we couldn't. The Yukon we couldn't.
Okay.
The Yukon didn't have the storage capacity that our van does.
Got it. Also,
it's higher.
I was thinking the Sierra, it's a truck, right?
The Sierra we probably could because we have the box space and the cabin. So the Yukon doesn't have nearly the capacity. We still stored hay bales on the roof, and thank goodness when we traded in, nobody looked at the roof because it was, despite being a luxury vehicle, it was used very much like a utility vehicle. And our van gets used the same way, but that's sort of the point, is that, by something that you intend to amortize until it's used up and trade it in as a kidney car or for scrap, you can do that when you don't pay for luxury. When you pay for luxury, it gets very expensive to do that. You're really amortizing a lot of excess. Whereas if you buy something that's very utilitarian and you use it that way, it permits you to not have that recurring expense. We're sort of digressing because I could talk about cars all day too.
Yeah. It's funny because the other day, speaking of cars and talking about them, I can talk cars with anyone too. Like, they're very talkable about, but it usually comes back to finances or power or this or that or storage space. But it's not that I can't talk about it. Same with you. It's that I think we've come to realize that, like, I've driven transport trailers and like did that for a job, and you have, like, that's really interesting that you were driving pickup trucks for 21 years it was? Ish? Yeah.
Well, and when we continue on with the F-250, it was another several years after that.
Yeah. And so, but then at 37, you were able to change. I just want to make that clear that you went from truck heavy, car heavy, vehicle heavy, to now, I don't want to say this, I'll say it, it's going to be kind of funny, but realizing the error in your ways. So it's not even that, because some people have to, when farmers, etc.
When my life was truck heavy, I used the truck.
Exactly.
Right? There was a couple of years. So I shouldn't say that. I think by the time I was 31 or 32, my life had evolved to the point where I didn't need it anymore.
But you were
but prior to that, I was logging, right? And I was constantly hauling large loads, and I was a single guy, right? But then I moved to the city to do my undergrad. Then it became much less reasonable, right? I was probably using it as a truck 20 or 30% of the time. Most of the time it was not. It was the proverbial grocery getter.
Exactly.
And then, so then would have been a logical transition point, but the emotional transition was harder.
Were you attaching your identity kind of to it too?
Oh, of course. Like, Alabama wrote, you can take me out of the country, but you can't take the country out of me. And that was, a very realistic perspective on it. Your identity is attached to your vehicle. And as soon as you learn to detach your identity from your vehicle or reconfigure it as almost like now my identity is attached to both the cargo bike and my bike in the van in a different way. It's almost, antagonistic towards what prevailing societal norms want you to do.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
And that's when you do that, it is quite liberating. But I would probably say on reflection, my identity is more strongly associated with my current vehicles than they ever were with being a driver of pickup trucks.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not separating because as you said that, I'm like, I don't think that when people talk about me or you, they're like, oh yeah. And they never mention bicycles.
Yeah.
It's like, no. It's going to be brought up.
Yeah.
It does.
I don't do podcasts about my love of driving pickup trucks.
Exactly. So is that. So I guess now it's like, okay, you've reached the point that now you're doing podcasts about your bike.
Yeah.
And your car lightness. So
and ferocious advocacy for vulnerable road user safety.
Yep.
Which, again, I think it's reasonable to talk about the hazards. Right?
Yes.
We've talked about how they're a barrier for people who are thinking about switching over to car-free commuting at the hospitals. This is what I deal with as I try to advocate for people to support them. But also on day-to-day interactions. We talked about the Land Rover overtook us yesterday and how there's frequently those types of interactions. And part of it's infrastructure design, like, specific active transportation infrastructure. The other part is how we design our communities to be used. Right. And so as much as I want to see a continued evolution in bicycling infrastructure, what I really want to see change is the design of how communities are built and how we modify them. So one of the big threats that happens when we talk about bicycle infrastructure is people think about how their neighborhood is going to lose street parking or they're going to have this extra lane that eats up their boulevard. Right. These are problematic things. We don't really want that. And in fairness, it doesn't really make things that much better because if you take my neighborhood and you throw a bike lane on Waterloo Street, you're going to create more confusing infrastructure for a lot of people with sort of negligible gains if you continue to maintain the width of the streets and the continuity of the streets, because you're still not removing the hazard, right? The hazard is vehicles traveling fast, right? And the faster they're traveling, you're increasing the hazard and you're increasing the likelihood, which is what brings about risk, hazard and likelihood. And so the likelihood of a collision happens when vehicles are traveling at greater speed, and it increases when there are more vehicles to have interactions with. The vehicles themselves are a hazard unto themselves, and their speed increases the hazard they pose to pedestrians. If you look at the WHO data, they say anything over 30 kilometers an hour causes a significant uptick in the mortality associated with injuries, which is what I see weekly. And I've been seeing for 20 some odd years, right? And that's not just cyclists. That's kids playing on their front yard. That is, families out for walks. That is kids on their way to school. And so by putting in cycling infrastructure, yes, you're creating a space for cycles to travel, but you're not changing the hazard in any way, right? You're just maybe reducing the probability of an interaction between a cyclist and a car. And you're giving people a sense of safety. I feel better when my kids are riding on, dedicated cycling infrastructure. I feel more comfortable. But the thing we could do is create neighborhoods with the intention of reducing through traffic, what we call rat running.
Yes,
right?
I was going to call it when you mentioned Waterloo Street. I'm like, yep, the grid pattern, which are really nice, except they encourage rat running.
But what you could do is what I observed in State College, where Penn State is. My brother used to work there. And they have these little chicanes in the middle of their intersections. They've taken the grid pattern neighborhood, but they've put in a little diagonal in the middle that, if necessary, emergency vehicles can get over. But it forces traffic decisions at particular intersections. So now you can, when you get to the intersection, both vehicles have to turn left. You cannot go through. And same thing if you're coming from the intersection, both vehicles have to turn. You can't go through that T intersection on a straight.
Right. I think right is the You have to turn right.
Right, or I mean, you could do it either way. But yeah,
Okay.
I guess right is probably.
So like Cheapside and whatchamacallit, there's one, well, not right now, there's construction, but
So
they just
William,
reconstructed it.
Cheapside and William has that.
Yes, there we go.
The better example that I can think of is Piccadilly and Wellington down by the Black Walnut. They
yes.
have that sort of T-style turn lane that if you're coming westbound on Piccadilly, you have to turn right up towards Oxford. And when you get to Oxford, you have to turn right again. Right? They force driver behaviors. The same thing if you're coming eastbound on Piccadilly, you really can't make any choice but head up towards Oxford Street. They don't want people traveling through that stretch because there's a daycare and a Montessori in that same stretch of road. And it's a residential neighborhood. People don't need to travel through there.
Yeah.
Right? So force driver behavior. If you do that on a systemic level for a neighborhood where you are thoughtful about how vehicles are going to travel through that neighborhood, you can reduce the speed of traffic by reducing their urgency to get to their destination and forcing more turns. You can reduce the volume of traffic by making it too cumbersome to travel through the neighborhood as a thoroughfare. But the people who reside there are going to know how to get to their destination from their house. It's going to take a little bit more finagling to understand how to do it, but they can do it. As a person who drove emergency vehicles for many, many years, it will have a negligible impact on response times, and the evidence will say no impact on outcomes, which is what we're really concerned about.
Oh, I'm going to talk to you in the future when I have questions about that, because so many people, okay, wait, hold up. The future is now.
Yeah.
Wavell Street.
Yes.
You know the bike lanes there?
Yeah.
I know it's on the potentially kind of like more opposite. It's closer to us. But anyways, if you go there as a cyclist, pretty good. As a driver, pretty good. As a bad driver, how do you do this?
Yeah.
But because you drove emergency vehicles, what are your thoughts on that? So it narrowed the road slightly, and it shouldn't be an issue, right?
You know what? I have driven through every street and neighborhood in the city. And a good example is where I used to live on Craig Street in Wortley. Craig Street was very difficult to navigate with two vehicles meeting and cars parked on the side because it was so narrow. And vehicles had to make choices to move over and permit each other to pass. I traveled through Craig Street in an ambulance, and the fire trucks followed me, or I followed them without any difficulty all the time.
Yeah.
Because vehicles know how to get out of the way.
Yeah.
And we can navigate around them as expert, emergency response drivers. We can navigate through many different types of circumstances. Vehicles can move out of the way, and maybe as we change our infrastructure, we might have to be reflective about the size of emergency vehicles we choose, which would be cheaper and easier on the roads and easier to navigate and safer. But even with the size of emergency vehicles we have, we can still navigate without much difficulty. And if you look at the evidence around emergency vehicle response times, particularly when it comes to ambulances, because I don't want to engage with the fire side because that's not my area of expertise.
Fair.
But there is very little benefit, and in some cases in the evidence, no benefit to traveling with lights and sirens at all.
Really?
Because the hazard does not outweigh the benefit. And the number of times you're traveling with your lights and sirens activated for someone who truly needs that level of immediacy in their care is actually quite low. We won't get into that too much because I didn't prepare a whole lot of review for the emergency vehicle literature for today. But,
Fair.
But ultimately, we do a lot of hand-wringing around emergency vehicles, and people who don't want to see the infrastructure changed or narrowed to limit their ability as drivers will often use the emergency vehicle as the shield to their true intentions. Yes, it is reasonable to be concerned about emergency vehicles, but these are expert drivers who know how to navigate. And I can tell you, it is easier to navigate Craig Street than it is to navigate Wellington Road at rush hour. It requires some change in behaviors and route planning and things like that, but no. The other thing is that when you have bike lanes there are often chances for vehicles to get out of the way into the bike lanes. Right, the bike lanes are rarely continuous, and they can move out of the way. If it's a cycle track, now you're not bumping up against the curb. That's just how wide the road is.
Yeah,
and like I said,
exactly.
we got narrow streets in the city. We navigate them all the time.
And I can confirm that vehicles can get into the unprotected bike lanes because on the way here, Cheapside,
They're always there.
just all their landscaping companies and
Yeah.
stuff. I'm like, oh, come on.
They love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is great.
Yeah, doing couch drop-offs and
I find it interesting with the trailers and the landscaping companies that they find the need. I think it's just a convenience thing. It is, because the driveways are there, especially in, let's say, Old North over there where I passed and they were in the lanes. I'm like, the driveway, you could go in there. You could just go right in there. You can back it up. You're a professional. You can do it.
it's a conditioned behavior, though.
Yeah.
It's a conditioned behavior that, even when there's no bike lane, vehicles park on the side of the road.
True.
Right? On my street, Waterloo Street, there's no bike lane, but the landscaping vehicles that all tend to people's houses park on the side of the road. Now, what I really love seeing is the landscapers who don't require trucks or trailers, and who have like a little trailer hitch mounted platform that they put their lawnmowers on.
Yes.
That's, I think we're going to see change as it becomes more cumbersome to use large vehicles. We're going to drive consumer choices, and whether that's industrial consumers like landscapers or personal choices. If you find it's too hard to navigate your neighborhood with a large SUV, you're going to increase consumer demand for smaller ones.
Yep.
Right. And that's, I think, where that change is going to happen. And it's going to we're going to have to continue to advocate for the idea that what we don't need necessarily is safer cyclists. I want safer cyclists, but we need is safer neighborhoods and safer worlds to navigate. And that requires a change in perspective over what the objective is.
I was going to bring this up earlier when you were mentioning we're making safe cycling infrastructure. That's great. But at the same time, when you see people come in and they're into your work and they've been in a collision, especially with a driver driving a motor vehicle and didn't see XYZ, and that's not a cyclist. Sometimes it is, but you're talking, and I fully agree with this. It's safer streets for all. Like, if a parent is like, well, we don't need that bike lane, or, oh, we don't need this, or we don't need that because it won't help me. Okay, it will, though. It will. Bike lanes, cycle lanes, they reduce the speed because they narrow the roads. That's good. Yeah. But even if it's not that, even if it's like, we don't necessarily need a bike lane on, let's say, your road. It's a residential street. But all of the other things that you mentioned are very important to having a safer, slower street. And there's like, well, I want to go fast. It's like, no. Oh my goodness. Okay, counter to that. Do you have a counter to that? I don't care about safe streets in my neighborhood. Yeah. I want to go fast. I want to tear out of my driveway and I want to get to work. At that point, I don't think. No,
so there's not a good conversation to be had. What I tend to do in many of my political discussions, whether or not it's related to vaccination safety, whether or not it's related to vehicle safety on farms, because I deal with the farming community a lot in my role. And I grew up on a farming community, so I know how the culture of living on a farm can be. And I understand our relationship with vehicles. And I know the statistics around child mortality on farms and morbidity on farms being higher by virtue of the fact they're exposed to large vehicles and they're often driving sooner. Or whether I'm talking about speeds in neighborhoods. I can provide facts. I can try to engage with people on a personal level to help them understand. But if people are really committed to a perspective, you're not going to change them, right? Like I said, it's you're on a mission to civilize, and so you create a civilized space. You create an opportunity for dialogue and discussion, and hopefully you convince enough people that you can shift the mass. Right? I'm not going to shift the driver in the Land Rover yesterday who overtook us while looking at her phone.
Oh no, that makes it even worse.
And that's okay, right? Because there's going to be people who make all sorts of decisions with their lives and their behaviors, and people who are going to get very committed to their cause, just like I am. And so often I find it not valuable to invest a ton of energy in that, other than to say, once you go from 30 kilometers an hour in a neighborhood to 40 kilometers an hour in a neighborhood, you're increasing the mortality, I think, from 2 in 10 to like 6 in 10, right? And it continues to go up from there. And by the time you hit 60 kilometers an hour, it's about 9 in 10, the number of people who will be struck by a car and die.
And that's without the injuries levels, because the injuries
injury severity increases as well.
Huh.
And at the same time, that was prior to the new evolution of vehicles, in which we're seeing higher grills and higher hoods on a routine basis. And so now the injury pattern of a sedan striking my 10-year-old used to be like femur fractures, right? Now we're seeing crush injuries to the chest and abdomen and pelvis, and traumatic brain injuries from the direct first hit, not the secondary hit, which is what we used to see before, where people have a higher injury severity and a higher likelihood of death as a result of these impacts.
Got it. And when you say primary and secondary, so primary would be, let's say, at the leg level, not great, but then the smack on the hood is the second, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so you have the first hit by the object, you have the second hit by the deceleration force and the contact with the wherever you end up. So,
Got it, yeah.
If I get hit and it crushes my pelvis and my femur on the initial impact, the next impact is going to be when I land on my opposite shoulder and hit my head. Right?
Yep.
That's your secondary injury.
And now we've scared everyone from going Carlite. But
well, I think that's there's lots of conversations about that, right? People, as much as say 9 in 10 people think it's very charming to see our kids in the aero, there is still confrontations on a near daily basis about how dangerous our choice is for our children. We are having to be very conscientious about the fact that the vehicle we're in is less protective than that Yukon was, right? When I was brought up, my mom always wanted me to have a big steel vehicle. Like driving a big full-size pickup truck meant I was going to be safe if I ever got hit.
Yep.
But the counterposition that is that you're also a greater hazard to those around you.
Yes.
The second one is that it forces us to make different choices about where we're going to travel. Right? And so we tend to choose our routes very wisely, and we try to find those neighborhoods where vehicles are going to be traveling slower, where we're going to have less vehicle interactions, and we try to get to the Thames Valley Parkway as soon as possible. And that leads to decisions about what we're going to do with our time. Right? So we don't choose to go to super centers on our bike because, first of all, it's not a very pleasant experience to go there. And second of all, it's more hazard. Right? And so instead, what we've done is we craft our life around the places we can get to by bicycle, and that's where the majority of our interactions happen. And then sometimes, if we think we're going to be traveling in more hazardous spaces, we take the ban.
Yep.
And I think that's what Carlite really is that you're not just choosing your mode of transportation, you're crafting your life around behavioral choices and things that are important to you. And so while people can't necessarily conceive of using a backfits to travel with their kids, all they see is the hazard. They don't see the opportunity, and they don't see the things that we do to mitigate the hazard. And sometimes that's not enough, right? I mentioned previously getting hit by a truck, and last summer, while traveling through a residential neighborhood, I came upon a garbage truck that was finishing a pickup. And I stopped, and I think I was probably 100 to 200 meters behind it. And I just sort of stopped and waited in my lane, and they finished their pickup, and instead of continuing forward, they just threw it in reverse and pinned it backwards in reverse. And they were on top of me almost instantaneously.
Which is like, not forget, but like, even if you weren't there, like that is a child could have been, and so much can change,
So I can
right?
tell you about this in a minute.
Okay.
So they were on top of me immediately. And fortunately, I was on the arrow that day because I was doing a longer route. I didn't have the kids with me. And so when they hit me, the arrow, they crushed the front wheel of the arrow, but the box got caught and didn't go beneath the bumper. Right. And so then what happened was the arrow laid down. I rode on top of it and sustained some minor injuries until they heard me hollering to stop, and they stopped the truck. I was able to get up from underneath it without significant injuries, and we were able to sort of pull it out and get it off to the side of the road. And when I looked at it afterwards, the box was intact, despite being hit by
a literal garbage truck.
A garbage truck traveling probably 30 to 40 kilometers an hour in reverse, and sliding along the asphalt for 30 or 40 meters, right? Like we went a long ways before they realized I was there, and I could get like over to the curb enough to be seen and heard. And so the thing that was reassuring to me is that if my kids had been in there with their seatbelts on, they would not have been hurt. They would have been terrified.
Oh, for sure.
But they wouldn't have been hurt because the box held up.
That's amazing. Against a garbage truck.
Against a garbage truck, hitting them at fairly high speeds.
Formidable.
And so because the aluminum frame was so sufficient, it sort of sustained the impact. Now we replaced that aluminum frame because it took a dent, and that's a safety infrastructure. What I take away from that is sort of my reflection on how, again, the infrastructure is designed to encourage driver behaviors. In this case here, their route was designed to stay in that neighborhood. So rather than crossing over the major artery, they backed up to head down the side street. That also plays into the route design, right? So the route design of industrial vehicles is an important consideration for vulnerable route user safety. And then finally, the policies. And this is what I tried to engage with the municipality about, was the idea of having robust policies around how they back vehicles, right? So when I was on the paramedic service, we could not back we have 2 people in our trucks. And so unless we were solo in our vehicle and we'd followed a strict set of policies, we weren't backing up without having a backer to back us up. So when you go to Victoria Hospital, you see the flag person backing the truck up. When you go to construction sites, you see a flag person. When you go to see a fire truck reversing, you see 2 firefighters acting as flag persons whenever possible. And so sanitation department doesn't have that same policy in place.
Which I am surprised. They're large vehicles. They're Class C vehicles because they're non-articulating and everything. I think that means that they're
Class D.
Class D.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be backing them up.
And interestingly, it came up about a week later where a similar episode happened in Old South when a woman had a dashboard camera on her car. But the same thing happened. She was sitting in her car and a garbage truck backed into her and smashed up the front of her car. And you see there's these near misses, these latent safety threats where you have things happen where nobody actually gets hurt, but they're significant signals towards a hazard that don't get appropriately mitigated, right? They don't use these as learning experiences. I asked for that. I said I wasn't as concerned about the cost of repairing my bike as I was about them changing their policy. They repaired my bike. They didn't change their policy to my understanding. I think it requires us to be reflective about how our systems interact with the world around them and what that means for the people who don't have a 2,000-pound steel box protecting them.
You were still utilizing the truck in the last few years when you got to London.
Yeah.
Like 20%-ish. With that use, most people, I would say, don't. And I can generalize that way because what are people do? Like most people are not utilizing a truck. Like we got... For most of humanity, we got along without trucks. And then, yes, now we have car centrism, so you might need a truck to do things, although the Urban Arrow is very capable. It's really about distance and towing capacity in your case.
Yep.
So were you still towing a trailer or?
Intermittently. We were intermittently towing a trailer. We were often hauling hay. But what we found was that we didn't need it as much as we were using it. And often we need something less. Right. So, for instance, consumer choices have changed the way that trucks are built. But when I was young, Ford Rangers and S10s and little Toyota Tacomas were ubiquitous.
I love those.
But they have disappeared in favor of overbuilt vehicles because the auto manufacturers make more money and because of the status symbol associated with them. Trucks have become more of a status symbol than luxury vehicles in many instances. So you talk to a middle-aged guy like me, and a lot of times their ambition is to own a 4x4 off-road capable pickup truck. And then you look around and you see how, 4x4ing is like a status symbol that people wear as a badge when they drive their vehicle. And whether that's a pickup truck or whether that's a Bronco or whether that's a Jeep, they have changed. They've all changed. Jeeps used to be kind of like a counterculture. People who drove Jeeps, they weren't very utilitarian in how they could be used on a daily basis. They were for people who legitimately seemed to want to go out into the wilderness and bounce around. But what's changed is that little niche status for people has become a large culture, and people spend a lot of money to have that look, right? But I think that as a society, we're all looking for where we fit in.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And we're all looking to be appreciated for who we are. And
the automotive companies can market to everyone's insecurities. Yeah. That's where you get them. And so that's where you can buy into that culture just with these low, easy monthly payments. Yeah. Or weekly payments now, I think it is, to minimize. Sorry, so I didn't want to get too far away. That came to mind. Okay, so with the garbage truck, did you wrap up with that?
Yeah, so the municipality paid for the repairs. Our bike was rebuilt very effectively, and it's back to sort of standard. Really, the true damage to the vehicle was the front wheel, some of the steering assembly, and the cafe lock, which I broke off with my leg when I landed on it.
Oof.
But otherwise, ouchie. And so that required replacing the brake assembly and the front wheel and things like that. So it was probably about $700 worth of damage in total. Now,
I thought it was going to be way more.
Now, when we replaced the box, right? Okay. As well, because it's a piece of safety equipment that was damaged, and that brought it up to about $1,600.
Okay, that is still. I honestly was assuming that it was going to be like 4, 5, 6, 7, like almost the cost of the thing.
The bike took the hit well, and then it just rode along the road. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I am impressed that it was under $2,000 for repair.
Now, if my bike had gotten hit, it would have been a write-off, right? Like my I would have gone right under, and that would have been that. Hopefully, and I might have been a write-off too.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to say the fact that it was in the urban arrow and no one was in it, but also, as you said, if they were strapped in and the cage did its job, which it did, then it was actually the ideal bike to get hit in, because when you fell over as well, it was still protecting you, ish. Like your leg still probably was kind of caught in there, I'm assuming, if you're sideways on the ground.
Yeah.
But the box is up there preventing it from fully
going underneath.
over.
Yep.
So, wow. Okay. All right. Well, the sun is changing positions and we got through a bunch of different stuff. Let me see if we have anything to wrap up with. Final thing, unless you have something, we'll cover that in a moment. But how do you feel with the city moving at the pace that it is, with connecting the bicycling grid, etc.? I'll ask you. You can go negative, positive, however you want.
I think it's a slow process. I see consistent changes in the infrastructure, which I'm grateful for. Every time I see new developments going in, I'm impressed by how many protected bicycle infrastructures are being built, especially on things like roundabouts, which are, a different story. But like, I'm seeing more of it happen than we've ever had before. Sometimes I have misgivings about the choices that are made because I don't think they're suitable, for the demand of the space, right? The vehicles and the hazard. But sometimes I think they're making the best out of what they can. I'm disheartened by the split we see on city council now, which is really kind of problematic, in which some councillors want to opt out of the master mobility plan altogether.
Even though they agreed to it.
Initially. Yes, I agree to this plan, except for this street in my district. So if you can just get rid of all those, then the master mobility plan will be perfect, which is not really a master mobility plan anymore. And in many cases, this disenfranchises the most vulnerable individuals, the ones who are most vulnerable to the cost of owning a vehicle. Whereas if you actually optimize the master mobility plan, you're going a significant way to addressing the cost of living crisis. If all of a sudden people with a bike and a bus can get anywhere in the city, any time of day, in a reasonable time, you can save them $10,000 to $15,000 a year.
And that is significant for most people.
It is huge, right? It's sometimes that's 50% of their income. Even in our case, it was a significant chunk of our income over the past few years that we were able to divert towards like trying to manage our handle and feed and care for our kids that we would have otherwise had to pay for the large asset rotting in our driveway. And so I think that the current political discourse is misguided. I think that we could be more creative with how we design infrastructure so that it's not always about that protected bike lane, but maybe it's about how we direct vehicles and favor vulnerable road users and active transportation over traffic flow, right? So when we talk about neighborhoods, if we reduce the speed and the volume of traffic going through a residential neighborhood, you no longer need to address active transportation infrastructure. Because by narrowing the streets, by creating the little chehanes at the intersections to force driver choices, you've all of a sudden taken away that impetus to travel at high speed through the neighborhood, and you've created a more welcoming environment for people to spend time in their community
and visually interesting too.
Yeah, and visually interesting in most circumstances.
Yeah, which adds to well, I'm never gonna hop on a bike. It's like okay, but well, don't you want an interesting neighborhood too? Yeah. I'm just trying to think of all the opposition, and oftentimes it just makes neighborhoods better if they're safer streets, they're cuter, and the pinch points along with chicanes, which I don't think are the same, but the pinch points at the intersections are really nice because it allows drivers. Or
center boulevards.
Right? Yes. And I was talking with someone recently. They were mentioning, hey, can't we have trees in roads?
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a second. Yes, they do have them places. And this is within the last week. And I'm like, I have to look into that. But wouldn't it be cool? I think it almost comes off as ridiculous, but I'm gonna say it anyways. Wouldn't it be cool to have a tree in the middle of the intersection?
If you go to Wellington Street North, they've got the boulevards with trees growing up right in the middle of the road. And you could do the same thing in an intersection with those sort of chehanes. Now, we just have to be creative.
Yeah.
And we have to look at where other places have implemented it. There's a reason why Paris has been really effective at changing the entire population's transportation choice in a few short years.
Political will.
Political will is a big one, right? But also it's community support for it, right?
Yes.
That drive, because there is that hunger for it. We recently had two incidents in Old North. The first was a collision at the corner of, I believe it was St. George and Colburn, which is a sort of notorious intersection because of the only stop signs on the one, the east-west lanes. And a vehicle traveled through there. There was a collision. That vehicle left the roadway because of the speed that it's traveling and the momentum that both vehicles were carrying, and left the roadway and struck a crossing guard who was sitting there. That crossing guard was injured. I believe, fortunately, not to any great severity, but of course I don't have any professional insights into that. And people were upset about that. But that, for me, I see that hazard all the time. I've been coaching my girls for years that when we get to intersections like, for instance, our Waterloo and Cheapside, they can't approach the post to press the button. They need to stay back a full house's lawn worth, right? So we stop at the last driveway before that intersection, because that's where I perceive that the momentum will lower the likelihood of a vehicle getting to that spot. Yeah. If they're any closer, they are liable to get hit if there's ever a collision at that intersection. And then there was, a day or two after that crossing guard was struck, there was a vehicle hit at that intersection, and one of the vehicles left the roadway and hit the post that was about halfway back from where I have my girls stand when we're at the intersection, because that hazard is just so great by virtue of the way we choose to optimize traffic flow. And so if we can start to cause that mode shift so that people aren't using personal vehicles, and then redirect that individual vehicle mode to the arterials, we can lower the hazard for people in their neighborhoods where they're more likely to be utilizing active transportation. It doesn't still do much to change the threat posed by those who are traveling alongside those arterials, but at least we can make a little nudge, right? And that's what we want to do, is continue to nudge things in that right direction. And I try to maintain a positive approach to it, but it is very frustrating to see it so disparaged and so often undercut.
Yeah, and I think we'll be talking about that in the future, because the Crash Analysis Studio, that is a Strong Towns initiative, which is an organization in North America that's trying to make streets better, basically, and more safe, along with a bunch of other things. But we are doing that in our neighborhood, and we're trying to analyze and gather data and say, hey, like, if the city can't do it, which they should be, really, they should be analyzing it and making those changes. At the top of this, or in the middle of the podcast, I forget where, whatever, in this episode, we were saying, like, something happens, make a change, instead of, oh, it's just natural, and just don't do anything. No mitigation. Or even with the garbage truck, it's like, hey, maybe you should change protocols or whatnot. Which the fact that that's not a protocol already for a heavy machinery, that's weird to me. So that's very weird. But with this intersection, I think we should look into doing that as well, because you can gather the data, and again, it can't guarantee change, but gathering the data and figuring out speeds and how many people actually stop at the stop signs. Because I know a lot of people say, hey, like, cyclists don't stop. It's like, well, okay, but drivers don't either. And they're driving a much more dangerous vehicle. And we can see here that was it two cars colliding?
I believe so.
Okay.
Like, I know there was a collision between two vehicles. I don't know what type of vehicles they were, but one left the roadway and struck a crossing guard. And the same type of interaction happened at Cheapside and Waterloo within 48 hours.
Yeah. And there's something, I don't know what it is. I believe there is the indicator species of crossing guards existing. The fact that they exist at that intersection is already a sign that, like, crossing guards shouldn't have to exist. They're there, volunteers typically, I believe.
It's a paid position.
They are? Okay. When they are there, it's saying, hey, there's a vulnerable population, so kids typically, and the intersection should be safer than it is right now, because someone has to go risk their life and hold up a small stop sign to encourage drivers to stop. And sometimes they just blast right by. I'm not sure how often that happens, but I have seen videos on the interwebs of people just being like, yeah, I'm not stopping for you, going by. Or crossing guards getting hit, not like this case, but just people being distracted on their phone like the Range Rover driver and just not seeing the glowing, bright, translucent, not translucent, whatever, the high-vis vest of the crossing guard. It's like they're walking pylons. How can you not see them? And yet they are hit quite frequently. Luckily not here in London.
You're not going to truly improve the safety until you remove the hazard.
Precisely.
And that's it doesn't matter how we try to mitigate it. Removing the hazard is the way that we're going to reduce vulnerable road user mortality and morbidity in this city. And until then, we're not going to do that.
Morbidity, is that injury?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So mortality is mortality, morbidity, injury. Why is that? Totally random question here.
I don't know the Latin roots of
okay, there.
Yeah.
You're like, I didn't prepare my research for this. No. Okay. Yeah. So, okay. Upside, because that was kind of a negative ending. Whoops. Okay. We biked here, totally fine.
Yeah.
And we have been biking, and it's been quite enjoyable. I mean, that's just a kind of a slap on ending at the end. Do you have any closing thoughts? Did you want to?
No, I think that's it. I sort of covered the fact that the choice to transition towards a car-free lifestyle for our girls for most of the time has dramatically improved the quality of life that we experience. It guides our decision-making because it is so valuable, and the cost of making other choices has become so great. Whether that's emotional cost or physical cost is just so immense. It is really hard to quantify how much benefit you can gain by having greater interaction with your community by virtue of just being exposed to them on a daily basis, and how much you and your family will see by virtue of the fact of that exposure.
I fully agree. I'm going to go say hi to my community now and bike through it. As you are, I guess, too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining me, Colin.
Yeah.
This was great talk on a bench.